Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday evenings Torah class that Shelly and I host with our amazing speakers. We always like to start off the class with giving. Thank you, everyone, for showing your faces. It makes the class just feel more real. So we like to give off with giving because the way we give, that's how Hashem gives to us. It's like a mirror. So if we can start off by giving tzedakah. And we're going to start off by saying names of those that need refuah shalema and those that need other things. So, and if you have anyone if you have anyone to add, please post it in the inbox if I didn't mention the name. So refuah shalema for Sima Bas Devasha, a dear friend that needs a refuah shalema. Genya Bat Tamar, Bluma Necha, Bas Chana, Razel Bas Hadas, Avram Hirsch Ben Etta, Chana Yenta Rivka Bas Shendel, Shimon Ben Alice, Chana Bas Rivka Dina, Shalom Dover Ben Rivka Bela, Bracha Chaya Bat Nesya Gila Masuda, Sarah Nova Bat Chana. And we are doing this in memory of Rafal Aaron Yoha Levi Ben Rachel, Yisrael Ben Avram Besara, Hinda Leah Bas Menachem Mendel, Chana Bas Aaron Leib, Rivka Dina Bas Yosef Yehuda. Hold on one second. Also in memory of Eliyahu Ben Rachel, Rolika Bas Esther, Refuah Shalema for Miriam Bas Ina Pese Yechaved. That's who was on the flyer. A young mother of 3 was in a terrible car accident where a drunk driver crashed in. A beautiful 15 or 16-year-old passed away, and she needs to get back with her family. So if everyone could please have everyone in mind. And Refuah Shalema for Bracha Chaya Bat Nesya Gila Masuda, Rachama Bluma Rivka Bas Chaya Rachel, Yehuda Yenta Rivka Bas Dina, Sarah Nova Bas Chana. I think I said that twice. And this is in honor of these people for Shidduchim, Chanoch Ben Chaya Leah, Shelia Tara Bas Leah, Hinda Bas Chaya, Esther Bella Bas Yakova, and for all Klal Yisrael, anyone that needs, please put it in the inbox. If everyone could respond, amen. Tonight's evening is a really special night that I'm very, very excited about. Each time I'm even more excited than the last, but tonight is really special. If anyone sees behind me, there's a picture of the Rebbe. He's a very big part of my life and many people's life, and anyone who has the merit to know anything about him, it's a blessing. And tonight we're going to discuss his mother. She was an amazing human being. We don't know so much about her, but many people do, from our generation, my generation. So I'm very excited. I also have a family connection to her, so I will tell you later on. I shared it with Mrs. Ita Marcus. She's our guest speaker. We're so grateful to have her tonight. She's going to start, but I just want to tell you how we got her on this class. Even though she's very close to some people I know, I didn't have her contact information, but I was in Mexico over Hanukkah, and my husband was very proud of my class, and he pitched it to everyone. Do you know my wife does a Torah class? And a lot of men were like, what is it? I was a little embarrassed, but I told them about it. And this one amazing guy, his Mrs. Ita Marcus's son, who's a big singer. If you want to hire him, he's great. You can Google him. She'll share his first name with you. He said, you should really get my mother. So I said, what's her topic? She said, Rebbetzin Chana. I said, great. When's her birthday? When's her yard site? And he mentioned that her birthday is coming up in this month. Like, it's going to be, I believe, on Shabbos. So we're so glad. It's because of Ita Marcus's son that we have you tonight. So thank you for joining us, Mrs. Ita Marcus from California. And she's going to tell us a little bit about herself as well.
Good evening, ladies, family members that I see on the screen here. Yes, thank you, Eli. Eli was the shadchan. He made the shidduch between Chaya and I. And that brings me here tonight with you on a very auspicious night, the night of Chof Hei Teves. Today was Chof Hei Teves, which is actually Rebbetzin Chana's birthday. So that is a very auspicious time for us to be speaking about Rebbetzin Chana. My husband would not forgive me if I didn't introduce myself. He said, you must introduce yourself. So here goes. My maiden name is Friedman, Ita Friedman Marcus. And I was actually born in Czechoslovakia. We came to the United States in 1950 and grew up in Crown Heights, right next door to Rebbetzin Chana. So we lived in 1414 President Street. The Rebbetzin lived 1418 President Street. Those of you that are familiar with Crown Heights know that it is a big apartment building, 4 stories high. Today it's a dormitory for the Bacharim, but it was once occupied by residents who lived there. And we lived in 1414. The Rebbetzin lived in 1418. I did see the Rebbetzin very often. Just walking down Kingston Avenue. We also got to see the Rebbe very often because the Rebbe would visit his mother very often. So I got married. I moved to Florida. I was going to be the secretary in the school. My husband was going to be a teacher. And when they needed a kindergarten teacher, they asked me if I would do a half a day kindergarten. And I said, nope, I'm not a teacher. I don't want to teach. I never dreamt about teaching. It was not on my bucket list, to-do list. And the administrator asked me if I would do it for 1 week until they found another teacher. And I said, okay, 1 week. That week is now 52 years that I have been a teacher. And I'm still teaching this year, which is it's unbelievable when I say it myself. But the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, had a lot to do with the fact that I became a teacher. I wrote to the Rebbe when I was expecting my 3rd child, that now that I'm going to have 3 children, it's very important for me to be home with my kids, explaining this to the Rebbe. And even though I'm teaching kindergarten now, it's not a good idea for them to have a new teacher, for get used to another teacher, and then the old teacher comes back. Probably a good idea for me to stop teaching. I also added that my principal, Rabbi Lipsker, said that he didn't mind that I would come and go and come back again, and he didn't think it would be detrimental for the kids. And yes, he did want me to come back and teach after I had the baby. You know, many times when the Rebbe would answer a question, he would underline something, circle something, cross something out, and that was your answer. So what the Rebbe did with this letter that I sent was he underlined that the principal would like me to come back even though it would be hard for the children. I didn't ask with my 4th, and after my 5th, my 6th, my 7th, my 8th, my 9th, my 10th. I didn't ask anymore. The Rebbe obviously wanted me to teach. So I am the mother of 10 outstanding, beautiful, Kinahara, wonderful children. And tonight, I have a Herculean job to tell you about the Rebbetzin, to try to describe to you who the Rebbetzin was is not an easy task. She was really one of a kind, and hopefully in the time that we spend together speaking about the Rebbetzin, we will be able to get a picture, a small glimpse of who the Rebbetzin was. The Rebbetzin was born in 1879 in Russia, Nikolaev, Russia, to a very illustrious family. Her father was a great rabbi. She married her very illustrious husband in 1898, Reb Levi Yitzchak, and she wrote her memoirs, but it's really all about her husband. The book is about her husband. The Aim B'Yisrael, the book that was advertised with the right behind me here, it's really about her husband more than it is about her. And we see here her modesty, that it wasn't about her. Everything was about her husband and about their life together. She had 3 sons. Her oldest was Menachem Mendel, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Her second son was Dov Ber, and her last son was Yisrael Aryeh Leib. Later on today, we'll talk more about a story with Yisrael Aryeh Leib. In 1909, her husband, Reb Levi Yitzchak, became the rabbi of a huge synagogue in Yekaterinoslav. Today, it is called Dnipropetrovsk. It was a huge shul, many, many congregants. He was a wonderful rabbi. People loved him. And the Rebbetzin was a Ezer Kenegdo. She was right at his side with everything that was being done in the shul, with the people that she communicated with, all the congregants and so forth. At that time, life was not easy in the Soviet Union. It's not like it is today. There was no freedom of religion. If you wanted to do things that were involved Jewishly, it was a big problem. The Rebbe Levi Yitzchak underwent many interrogations where they interrogated him about the Jewish activities that were going on in his shul. But they stood steadfast together and continued to do what they needed to do as rabbi and rebbetzin of that shul. In 1939, after all the interrogations and all of the difficulties, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak was imprisoned. He spent 9 months in prison for counter-revolutionary activities. Anything that had to do with being a Jew was called counter-revolutionary activities. At that time, the Rebbetzin describes how she went from the NKVD to the KGB to anyone who would be able to help her and tell her where her husband was taken, which prison was he in. She wanted to bring him some food. She knew he would not be eating the food in the prison. They lied to her. They gave her a hard time. They wouldn't tell her the truth. And she went from one to the other and was not able to find out where her husband was. After 9 months, he was given the sentence of being exiled for 5 years in a place called Kazakhstan in Chile, a place that, when I describe it to you, you will not believe that people were actually able to live under those conditions. And the Rebbetzin went and joined him in exile for the time that he was there with great, great self-sacrifice. In 1947, the Rebbetzin was finally able, miraculously, to leave the USSR and to come to Paris. There she was met by her son, Menachem Mendel, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who came to bring his mother to New York. The Rebbetzin lived in New York next to her son, just a few blocks away on President Street, for 17 years, until her passing in 1964, on Vav Tishrei, the 6th day in Tishrei, when it was the 10 days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it was on a Shabbos, so Shabbos Shuvah. The relationship between mother and son is really something to be in awe about. I'm going to talk about the relationship between the Rebbe and his mother. But the 17 years are very significant, that she lived 17 years with her son. The word tov, which means good, has the numerical value of 17. And we are told that Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our forefather, at the end of the book of Bereshit, that he lived with his son Yosef for 17 years. And those were the tov, those were the good years of his life. And here we find the same thing with Rebbetzin Chana, that through all of the trials and tribulations and difficulties that she had in her life, that the last 17 years of her life, she was able to live in freedom. She was able to live with her son, with her beloved son, who she hadn't seen for many, many years, to bask in the glory of her son becoming the Lubavitcher Rebbe and all of the wonderful things that he did, and to be able to have that nachas from her son. Those were the 17, the tov, the good years of her life. So let me tell you about the relationship between the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzin Chana was visited every single day by the Rebbe. The Rebbe would go there every day. Busy schedule. I don't have to tell you the Rebbe's schedule. And twice on Friday that he came to see his mother. Now, when he would come, my brothers would be playing outside and they would see the Rebbe approaching. They would run to open up the big doors on 1418 President Street, a big glass door with wrought iron, very heavy door, and another door that led into the apartment building. And the Rebbetzin would tell them, don't open the door for the Rebbe. That's probably the only exercise that he gets. But they continued to open up the door for him. And it was just something that the Rebbetzin would say, that's the only exercise that he gets all day. The relationship between the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin was such that the Rebbe had a key to her apartment, so that when he came, he would knock, but then let himself in so that she, if she was sitting, would not have to get up and open up the door for him. So he would have a key so that he wouldn't have to make his mother get up to open the door for him. Somebody who visited the Rebbetzin very often told the story that every time he was there, and he went often, and the Rebbe would come, and the Rebbe would be there. As he left, he did this interesting exit. He would turn a chair, close a curtain, kind of back out of the house. And he finally got up enough courage to ask the Rebbetzin, what's that all about? Why does your son always leave that way? And she smiled and she said, he thinks I don't know. But ever since he was bar mitzvah, he never turned his back to me and would kind of make his way out of the apartment without turning his back on his mother. Right across the street from 1414, there was a fruit store, still there, Roskin's fruit store. And the delivery boy who would deliver fruits and vegetables to the Rebbetzin once asked the Rebbetzin, what is the Rebbe's favorite prayer? From all of the davening, what's his favorite prayer? And she said, you know what, I don't know, but when he comes next time, I will ask him and I'll tell you what he says. And sure enough, the Rebbe came, she asked him the question, and when the delivery boy came back, she said, I asked my son, and he told me that his favorite prayer is Modeh Ani. That's my favorite prayer. And indeed, Modeh Ani, that's when all the prayers begin. The first one is that Modeh Ani. This is a story that I heard recently about the Rebbe's going above and beyond for his mother. Like we said at the beginning, the Rebbetzin had 3 sons, and the youngest, Yisrael Aryeh Leib, lived in England. And he would communicate with his mother through mail.
The same thing.
Doesn't work.
When you just shoving it, before you reach far, you see the light come on. When you shove it down, the light gone.
Please mute.
Sorry, Ita, if you could please unmute yourself.
Okay. When his brother passed away, he did not want his mother to find out about it. He felt that in her old age, she didn't need that kind of news, and he did everything in his power to not let her know that her son had passed away. So what the Rebbe did was he would have his sister-in-law write letters, send letters from England, postmark England. He would insert his own letter, making it look like it was from his brother Aryeh Leib. And his mother did not know that it wasn't coming from her son. Now, in the first week of Shiva, it was very difficult for the Rebbe because he wanted to go visit his mother, but he was sitting Shiva. So he asked the Rebbe asked the Rav what to do. Can he go to his mother even though he's in the middle of sitting Shiva? And the Rav said, you could go, but you cannot sit down You must not sit because you're sitting Shiva, but you can go to visit your mother. There was another problem. Back in the day, if you wore a pair of sneakers, which we wear when we are an Avel, we shouldn't have to be an Avelis, the sneakers were all white. You bought a pair of sneakers, they were white. They were not any other color but white. And how is he going to wear a pair of white sneakers to his mother's house? That's not going to be okay. So he took black shoe polish and he painted the sneakers that they should be black, and it shouldn't be so noticeable that he was wearing a shoe of a different color. He also had 9 men, who would be the minion that he had to daven with because he had to say Kaddish, and he swore them to secrecy not to let out a word that his brother had passed away. He didn't want it to get back to his mother that she had lost her son. This is the acrobatics that the Rebbe did to make sure that his mother would not be saddened by the passing of her son. Mother-son relationship, very extraordinary and beautiful. On the flip side of that, the Rebbetzin would say about the Rebbe many, many times, "Ihr weiß nicht, was ihr vermacht." You don't know what you have. You don't know what the treasure that you have, if that is my son. And I grew up in Crown Heights. I went to a lot of Fabrengens. I was there for Lag BaOmer parades. I thought I knew the Rebbe very well. After reading one of the books about the Rebbe, I remember closing the book and saying, you know what? I never knew who the Rebbe was. And she was right. You do not know what you have. Let's get back to Rebbetzin Chana. And I will share at the end some personal stories with Rebbetzin Chana, but I just want to give you a glimpse, if I can, of life in Russia in those days, life in exile after the Rebbe Levi Yitzchak was sent into exile. What kind of a life was led by the Jews who lived there at that time? The Rebbetzins memoirs, interestingly enough, you think I'm going to read the Rebbetzins memoirs and I am going to know more about the Rebbetzin, right? No. What you find out is about her husband. She writes about Rebbe Levi, the whole book is about her husband. But in between the lines, you see that she was there for him 100% through thick and thin, through all the difficulties that he went through. So the Rebbetzin describes a wedding during this time in Russia. It's 11 o'clock at night. There's a knock on the door. Opening the door, there is a woman standing there and whispers to the Rebbetzin that she is from a faraway city. She cannot say which city it is from. She cannot divulge that. It's too dangerous. But in 1 hour, her daughter and son-in-law are going to come to this house. And she explains that she cried and pleaded with her children to get married according to Jewish law. Dangerous, very difficult to do. But, and also because they were high-ranking officials in the Russian government, so that made it even more difficult for them. And they agreed under conditions. Number one, the wedding had to be performed by Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Schneiderson. Number two, it had to be in his home. And exactly 12 o'clock, the couple shows up. The Rebbetzin lets them in the house. She covers both of their faces because nobody can know who these people are, and puts them in a side room. In the meantime, Rebbe Levi is getting together a minyan for this chuppah. And within a half an hour, there were 9 men, as the Rebbetzin describes, that can see but cannot be seen. In other words, they are going to keep it under wraps where they were that night. So what do? There's a 10th man that's missing, and they can't do a chuppah without the 10 men. In the building that they lived in, there was an informer. This informer had a job to inform if there was any strange activities going on in the home of the Schneersons. That was his job. The Rebbe said to one of the men, Rabbi Yitzchak said to one of the men, go downstairs and call this neighbor. He's a Jewish man. He came upstairs. He was a Jew. He came upstairs and Rabbi Leivik tells him, listen, we're going to be doing a chuppah over here. We need you to be the 10th man. And he was in shock. He said, me? You want me to be the 10th man? And Rabbi Leivik said to him, yes. And he agreed. Rebbetzin took out a big white tablecloth. They chose the 4 tallest men. Each one held a corner of the chuppah, and the couple was led out from the room they had been hidden in. The kala circled the chassan, and the ksuba was read. It doesn't say anything about breaking a glass. The couple was now married, Kedas Moshe Yisrael, in a Jewish wedding ceremony, and the couple disappeared into the night. That is a wedding in Soviet Union when this was completely not permitted. And anyone who was part of it was also under interrogation. When they came to arrest Reb Leivik, like I said before, she fought and did everything in her power to find out where he was so she could bring him food, find out what's going on, and was given a very big runaround, a lot of lies, difficult through the Russian snow. And she describes the difficulties in trying to get some information about her husband. 5 years of exile was his sentence after 9 months in prison. She describes the exile. And like I said, this is difficult for us living in America to imagine something like this. The prisoners were taken to this place in Chile, in Kazakhstan, and were just let off and said, okay, here you are, this is the exile, and were just dropped off. They had no housing, they had no food, they had nothing. To find a place to live, knocking on doors, can we live in your house? Can we live in your house? Is there any place for us to live in your house? By the time the Rebbetzin came to be with her husband in exile, she describes the apartment like this. You walked into the apartment, there was a family, a man, a woman, and a child. There was a corridor, and at the end of the corridor, there was a room in which her husband occupied that room. There was no privacy. It was just a long hall. There were no doors, there was no curtains. There were no paved streets. You walked in the street, you were walking through the mud. And when she finally arrives there, she said she was so tired, exhausted from the trip. But when she tried to lay down to sleep, it was impossible because there were mosquitoes that ate you alive. Swarms and swarms of mosquitoes that buzzed and didn't let you sleep. And to get food, you had to stand in line for bread. And if you didn't come early enough and you were at the end of the line, you were told, I'm sorry, but there is no more bread. How his life changed from being the Rav of a big shul to living in a godforsaken place called Chile. And yet she remained with him, she stayed with him. And two of the stories that the Rebbe always repeated when it was her yahrzeit on Rav Tishrei, always talked about his mother's perseverance in exile, that Reb Leivik had these Torah thoughts that he wanted to record. There was no place for him to write. There was nothing for him to write with. And she went into the fields and she picked some herbs and grasses and she made ink and brought it to him. And he was able to write his Torah thoughts in the margins of the svarim, of the books that she had brought for him. And this gave him a new life that he was able to do this. The Rebbe always spoke about his mother's tremendous mesiras nefesh, her self-sacrifice when there were refugees coming into Yekaterinoslav after the First World War. And there was many, many hundreds of refugees who needed a place to live, a place to eat, a place of food, clothing. And he said his mother was in the forefront of this group that helped the refugees, and that she worked day and night. He didn't see his mother for days on end because she was busy with this, taking care of the refugees, finding them everything that they needed to settle until they were able to move on. The Rebbe always spoke also about the Rebbetzins' name, that her name was Chana. I don't know how many Chanas we have online here. I see one Chana, she's raising her hand there. Hi, Fanny. And the Rebbe said that Chana is the acronym. You take the first letter of the letters of her name, Ches, Nun, and Hey. They are the three mitzvahs that the women are obligated in. Ches is challah, which represents all the kashrus in the kitchen. Taking a piece of challah when you're baking a challah, you take a piece of dough, you set it aside, it's burned, it's not consumed, to reminiscent of giving it to the Kohen. And that is all of the kashrus in the home is on the Jewish woman. Nun is nida, which is family purity, that the woman is, that's her mitzvah as well, to go to the mikveh every month and to be purified. And the hay is hadlakat haneros, which is the lighting of the candles. That we, as Jewish women, are the ones who usher the Shabbat and the Yom Tov into our homes. That is our privilege, our special mitzvah, that we are the ones to usher the Shabbos and the Yom Tov into our homes by lighting the candles, hadlakat hanerot, the hay of Chana. So all of you Chanas out there, know that you have a very, very special name that the Rebbe would mention many times speaking about his mother. I would like to share with you some of the things that the memories that I have living next to the Rebbetzin Chana, and just preface it by saying that after living next door to the Rebbetzin and then reading the book Ein B'Yisrael, it was hard for me to equate this gentle, aristocratic, regal woman who would walk down Kingston Avenue with her hands behind her back and always looked so beautiful, with this woman that is described in the book Ein B'Yisrael. Is it possible that this angelic woman was the one who was fighting with the NKVD? This is the woman who was going through the Russian snows to help her husband be freed from prison. This is the woman who went into exile with him and lived that kind of a life. It was so hard to put the two of them together. So I have a brother who is a famous singer, and let me try to describe to you. When we had the apartment on 14th President Street, there were bars actually on the windows of our dining room. It was on the third floor. It wasn't because of thievery. It was because not to fall out of the window. We don't want kids falling out of windows. So there were iron grates in the window, and my little brother would sit with his feet dangling outside the window by these iron grates. And when he would see the Rebbe coming, he would start to sing a Lubavitcher Nigun. The Rebbe would look up at him at the third floor, and he would make with his hand to encourage him to sing. And he did actually encourage him to sing. And today he's a very famous singer. His name is Avram Fried. That's not really his name, that's his stage name. His name is Avram Friedman. But my mother once took him to visit the Rebbetzin. And he came along with her. And the Rebbetzin asked him, she was very musical. The Rebbetzin was very musical. She knew a lot about music. And she would tell her son, she would tell the Rebbe how much she enjoyed the singing of the Friedman family in the sukkah, because the sukkah was in the courtyard. So everybody's windows led out to this courtyard. Everybody was able to hear the singing. And she would tell the Rebbe how much she enjoyed it. So my mother brings Avremel along, and the Rebbetzin asks Avremel, would you like to sing something for me? And he demurred and he said, not really. And she said, how about if I go into another room? And with that, he calmed down and said, okay. So the Rebbetzin went into another room, and Avramel began to sing a Lubavitcher Nigun, and then the Rebbetzin came out. She thanked him for the beautiful singing, and she gave him a quarter. A quarter was a lot of money in those days. After the story made its rounds, years later, somebody quipped that this was Avram Fried's first paid concert. The superintendent of our building was an African-American that we were very scared of. We were very afraid of James. Nobody started up with James. And James told us that we are not to go into the grassy area around 1414 and 1418. He maintained it very beautifully. It was green grass in the middle of President Kingston Avenue. He was very proud of it. And he didn't want any kids playing over there, going in there for any reason. If a ball ever fell in there, we were petrified to go get the ball because James might come along and scream at us. My father, Alav Shalom, was very handy. And he asked James if he could build a bench for the Rebbetzin that would just, he would put it in the grassy area and that she could sit there when she comes out and she's tired, she doesn't want to go back inside and she wants to sit down, she'll have a place to sit. Now, even James realized that the Rebbetzin was a very special lady. And for this very special lady, he said, absolutely, you can build a bench there, which my father did. And the Rebbetzin actually did sit there many times. There's an incredible statement that we can say about our Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, with the next story. After the Rebbetzin passed away on Shabbos, she was brought back to 1418 to her apartment, and the Levaya, the funeral, was out of her apartment to Montefiore Cemetery. When Shabbos was over, that Shabbat that she passed away, when Shabbat was over, there was a call from the office of the Rebbe, the Rebbe's office. There was a question the Rebbe had. The Rebbe wanted to know that we should find out, that the Friedman family should find out, if 1414 had its own roof and 1418 had its own roof, or was it one roof over both buildings? The reason the Rebbe was asking this is because my father, Alav Shalom, and my brothers are all Kaihanim, and it would not be permitted for them to be in the house if that was the case, if it was one roof. And we did find out, we made some calls and found out that indeed there was one roof, and my brothers and my father did not spend the night, that night, Shabbos night, in our home. This was the Rebbe's concern. He had just lost his beloved mother. His concern was about the Kohanim who lived in 1414 President Street. I always knew that if God would bless me with a daughter, that I would want to give her a name after Rebbetzin Chana. And indeed, Hashem blessed us with a daughter, and we named her Chana. What I did not know was that Hashem would bless us with two granddaughters who carry the name Chana, and more recently, a great-granddaughter whose name is Chana. As we wrap up, we'll take questions if there are any questions, but I just wanted to say that Chana should continue to be a source of courage, strength, resilience, Mesiras Nefesh to all of us. And of course, Rebbetzin Chana, we owe you a great debt in giving us your son, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And we thank you for that. Chaya?
Wow, that was so, thank you for all that beautiful information that you shared. Many stories I did not know. The Rebbetzin, from what I was told, was a very friendly woman to many. I have a connection with Rebbetzin Chana, a personal connection that I recently found out. My name is Chaya, and I'm named after my great grandmother Chaya Wolshansky. And her husband was Batsal Wolshansky, and he was a friend to Rebbe Leivik, Rebbetzin Chana's husband. And when they were in exile and when they were in hardships, my great grandfather would learn with Rebbe Leivik, Nigla and Hasidus and things that he was so excited to have another fellow person that understood the deep concepts of Judaism, Kabbalah, and they learned together. And my great grandmother, who I'm named after, cooked for Reb Leivik, and he asked his wife, who cooked this delicious food? And he had very specific foods that he could eat for his diet and also kosher. And when it was found out it was his dear friend Reb Leivik's wife Chaya Wolshansky, he blessed her with long life. And I can say that my grandmother Bela Bas Chaya should be well. She's in Australia in a home, and she should live to very long years. Many more long years till Mashiach and with Mashiach. And her other children, she has another child in Australia as well that's alive, and her other children lived very long. And I felt such a beautiful connection to Rebbetzin Chana because it was a family connection. I just found out this story this year. Another connection that I have with Rebbetzin Chana is my father was one of the 10 men that were in the room with her when she passed away, and the Rebbe. And it's a huge merit that he was one of the people that were trusted to be with her in such a holy time. So I feel very blessed. Rebbetzin Chana was so proud of her son, and it's so special to see how much she loved her son. A really nice story that I heard, someone passed the Rebbe, and they said, how can my son be like you?
To be said about Rebbetzin Chana. Throughout reading about her life, you realize it was never about her. It was never about her. Her modesty is outstanding. Whatever she did in her life was always for someone else. She never took the credit. It was never about her. And that's a very important message for all of us. She was a very, very modest woman in many, many ways. She was always tzniistic in the way she dressed, her modesty and the way she dressed, the way she greeted people. There was just a beautiful modesty about her with her regal bearing. It was a beautiful combination of the two. And just now that I have the microphone again, I just wanted to add something that I read just preparing for this class, that someone said that most people don't know this, but if somebody needed a yechidus with the Rebbe and couldn't get a yechidus with the Rebbe because it was all booked up for the night and they wanted to talk to the Rebbe, they were told to go to Rebbetzin Chana and to speak to her, and that she would help them. This is not a very known aspect of Rebbetzin Chana's life.
That is very beautiful. I appreciate that. It's very, very special. Is there anybody on this panel that wants to ask something? We would love, to hear if anyone has anything to say, anything to ask. This is a beautiful, yes, Fran?
Hi, how are you? Thank
Fran.
you, Mrs. Marcus. It's
welcome.
so interesting. My question actually goes back to something you shared with us earlier on in the evening about the passing of the Rebbe's brother and his guidance, protection of his mother so that she wouldn't be able to handle bad news. Did it end up that he did share that his brother passed away?
It seems that the Rebbetzin never found out that she lost her son. She never knew.
Wow.
Yeah, he did a very good job in shielding his mother from that pain. Yeah.
Where was his brother? Was he in the United States or
He was
elsewhere?
in England. He lived in
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah. Yeah,
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you.
you are so welcome.
So did anyone ever send mail in his, as if it was him, so she would think that he was alive?
Yes, that's what the Rebbe did. That the mail was coming postmarked from England, but the letter inside was what the Rebbe himself wrote to his mother as if he was his brother. And as far as we know, the Rebbetzin never found out that she had lost her son. Bear, by the way, was also killed in Nazi Germany, and even though the Rebbe was the oldest, the longest.
And from what I understand is that Rebbetzin Chana, and not whatever, it's a known thing that Rebbetzin Chana was such a devoted wife, and it's something that we can learn from. She didn't have it easy. She went to the fields. She was in the cold. She was bitten by mosquitoes. It was really a challenging time for her, and she was alone, because in those days, like you didn't know who you can trust, who was your friend. There was very few people that you can talk to. So imagine, we didn't have cell phones back then. We didn't have internet. We didn't have any type of outside sources besides. So she was kind of all by herself when her husband was in prison, just from spreading Hasidus and light into the world. And we're so grateful for him because of what he sacrificed. We have the Rebbe, we had his wife that was able to pass on. He wrote all his transcripts on, I believe, newspapers. Is that correct?
In the margin of the books. And when the Rebbetzin left for Paris, she took with her some of the manuscripts of her late husband that she was able to bring to America with her. And just that in itself was a big self-sacrifice, because you couldn't travel with those kind of things. And the fact that she got out of the USSR was also quite miraculous. But today we have many books entitled Likutei Levi Yitzchak, I believe. And I failed to mention something very important. I don't know which year it was. I didn't check this out, but I remember when the Rebbe got a document from the Soviet Union, from Russia, exonerating Reb Levi Yitzchak of any crime or wrongdoing. So all of that, the time he spent in prison and all of the time that he spent in exile and then passed away in exile, it wasn't even a crime committed. Many years later, the document with the exoneration was sent to Reb Leivik's son, to the Rebbe, exonerated. Well, today we don't recognize Russia anymore. There are hundreds of shluchim who live in Russia. The Iron Curtain is gone, and we have a whole different scenario going on. We have Lag BaOmer parades in the streets of Moscow. We have concerts going on. And
Sorry, Mrs. Ether Marcus, I by mistake muted you because I was muting other people that didn't realize they were unmuted. My apologies. If you could unmute yourself.
Chaya mentioned the Mesiras Nefesh. Because of the Mesiras Nefesh that the Jews in Russia had, today, Russia is a whole different country. I love seeing pictures of children parading on Lag BaOmer through the streets of the former USSR. And seeing the menorah being lit, all of the things that we never thought we would see, we see today in Russia. There are hundreds of shluchim who live today in Russia. Hundreds of shluchim. Yeah. Mesiras Nefesh, there was a story about the Bris Milah, also an official in the Russian government who wanted to circumcise his son, but couldn't do it easily. So he brought the baby to Reb Leivik, and Reb Leivik did the bris. And then he came home from work that day, and loud, so that all the neighbors would hear, he started shouting, "Grandmother, what did you do? I told you this baby is not to be circumcised," and made a whole screaming, angry at his wife, at the grandmother, that how did you do this? This is terrible. I never allow this. And that's how they had to get around doing what they had to do, because it was forbidden in Soviet Union, not allowed. The Rebbetzin describes the wedding of her son, her oldest son, that they were not able to attend because the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were living in Poland at the time, and there was no way the Iron Curtain would let you out, and therefore they were not able to be present at the wedding. They were expecting, they wanted to make, on the day of the wedding, they wanted to make some kind of a celebration. I mean, the son was getting married, and they were expecting maybe less than 30 people. And she said over 300 people showed up at this wedding. A wedding without the Chassan Kala. Obviously, the Chassan Kala were back in Poland. But the neighbor, if you had an apartment and you didn't need all the rooms, they would section off the rooms and give it to another family to live. Things we can't really understand so well living here in America. But the partition, the neighbor took away the partition, took all the furniture out of his apartment so that there would be more room for more guests. And the wedding lasted all night long with dancing and tears of joy and tears of sorrow not to have the Chassan Kala there. Was not present at her oldest son's wedding to Rebbetzin Chayimushka.
Mr. Evsey Nemotin grew up in Almaty, Kazakhstan during Soviet times. His father, Reb Yosef Nemotin, was active in the Jewish underground.
When Chassidim were running from Germans, Almaty was the most close and the most safe place to live in the war. So they finished up in Almaty. Then when Rebbe's parents came, Rebbe's father was a Rav in Dnipropetrovsk. And he was arrested in 1939 for spreading Judaism. And he was tortured a lot. And then in a couple of months, he was sent in exile in a village Chilik. Only Kazakhs were living there. And Kazakhs didn't speak Russian. So the Rebbe's family came in an environment when they could not communicate. It was a terrible life. I am not going into details. The Chassidim in Almaty, they didn't have a Rav. And my father made arrangements to bring the Rebbe in Almaty. It was not an easy task. In Russia, in the times of war, a person couldn't move from one place to another by himself. He had to get an official permission. But my father, being an outgoing man and having so many policemen as friends, managed to do it. When a Rebbe with the Rebbetzin are coming, that's great, but they have to eat. They need food. To have food, you need money. So what my father did, he organized collecting money among Chassidim. Every Shabbos, Friday, Saturday, he was going around Chassidim collecting money and giving them to the Rebbe. Once my father was invited to come to the Rebbetzin Chana and Rebbe Leivik Yitzchak in unusual time on Saturday. When they entered the house, Leivik Yitzchak was laying and he was very feeble and he was crying. And when he was crying, Rebbetzin Chana asked him, "Why are you crying?" And he answered, "Whom I am leaving you with? I'm crying about leaving you alone." And and it was the last time my father saw Rebbe Levi Yitzchak alive. He died. One day my father was passing by Rebbetzin Chana's house and saw her crying. And he said suddenly by an impulse, Rebbetzin Chana, do you have relatives in Moscow? She said, yes, but it's a very far away relative and they don't live our life. And my father said, I will send you in Moscow. And Rebbetzin Chana, and he said Rebbetzin Chana was so exhausted that she didn't have strength to say something against it. And she said, okay, she agreed. And then the question came up how to send an aged old lady alone from Almaty to Moscow when the train itself was traveling 4 days. And my father found a family and they were going to Moscow. And they asked him, my father, to get a ticket and to Moscow, 2 tickets. He said, my father answered that he will give them a ticket if they will take another Chana. And they first disagreed, but then they found that it's impossible to get a ticket. And my father had acquaintances, but people whom he bribed. And these people arranged for him tickets. So they agreed, and they took Rebbetzin Chana with them in Moscow. And he arranged to smuggle her out of the Soviet Union. When Levi Yitzchak, he died, my father would go there. He was taking care of the Rebbe's grave. And he was paying money to people to renew the paint, to clean this place. He took care of this. We came to America, we were in the Farbrengen. The Rebbe told the people that my father did for his parents something what he should have done himself. And then the Rebbe invited us, all of us, to come to his office. And we went there. When we were leaving the Rebbe's office, he suddenly approached my daughter, Ita, who was 6 years old, bent down to her, and he told my daughter, "Спасибо тебе." I remember this. He said in Russian, "Спасибо тебе." The Rebbe came out for the funeral of my father, and it was absolutely unusual. When we came with the casket to 770, the Rebbe went out and he was walking with us to say bye to my father. He really appreciated what he did, and he loved my father.
We see how the Rebbe had so much akars atayv, so much. He always said thank you, and he never took anything for granted that someone did for his family, and he blessed people, and it was just really, really special. So, thank you everyone who joined tonight. Shelly, you're still with us. Thank you, Ita Marcus, for sharing with us. Thank you everyone for joining with us tonight. This class wouldn't happen without you. Thank you everyone who asked questions. Please, you could let us know if you'd like to be part of this class in the future. You can reach out to me. And good night, everyone.
Thank you, ladies.
And if you could take one thing from tonight that you learned to add into your life and to share with others, that would be very special. Be the reason why someone smiles today.
Thank you, Toda.
Everyone, thank you for joining. It was amazing. Thank you to our wonderful Ita for such a beautiful lecture today. Thank you. And thank you, Chaya, for meeting all these wonderful people. Good night, everyone. Have a blessed.
Good night, everyone.